You met Jacob DeLargy earlier. I'd remind you, he's a junior majoring in history at Colorado Christian University, hometown nearby here, Highlands Ranch. You'll recognize that Jacob has taken off his ROTC cadet uniform in order that he can be a little bit more free about the political dimension of the rest of today's summit. And I'll call on him again now to introduce our friend Frank Gaffney. And I'm now free that Jacob is back in civilian dress to tell you that he has revived the College Republican chapter at Colorado Christian University and is chairing that, and he is just back. He and fellow CCU student Ryan Barnett are just back from the Christians United for Israel, CUFI, week-long conference in Washington, D.C. This is a high priority for us at CCU as well. To present our next speaker now, Jacob DeLargy.
All that politics stuff is great, but that uniform honestly is just really itchy. That's why I changed. This morning, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing to you an individual that embodies the traits that we're all going to need if we take action like Tucker and Mr. Freeze talked about. You guys being here today is a testament to the fact that so many of us out there, we possess and we yearn for knowledge and understanding of the issues today. But unfortunately, we still have a major problem. Not too many of us are willing to do anything about it. What you don't realize is that not standing is standing. Not saying anything is saying a lot. What we need to do is take the next step and do something with the knowledge that we gain here this weekend. And I have the pleasure of introducing you to somebody who has done just that in his life. Frank Gaffney gets it. He realizes that not doing anything with the gifts that you've been given and the knowledge that you've attained is not acceptable. He has the kind of courage and audacity that is needed in the times ahead and the threats that we face, whether economics, national security, and other political issues. He's devoted his career and his energies to not only spreading knowledge, but spurring reform. Mr. Gaffney, through a long and colorful career, including such offices as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under the Reagan administration, and other offices such as in 1988, Gaffney established the Center for Security Policy, a conservative organization dedicated to national security and defense policy. He has appeared on numerous radio and television programs to offer his perspective on the threats facing the United States from both outside and inside. Mr. Gaffney contributed to the Team B2 report on the threat of Sharia and the Muslim Brotherhood inside the United States. He has been a dear friend of Centennial Institute, of Colorado Christian University, and of the cause of freedom and liberty across this nation. Please welcome to the podium, Mr. Frank Gaffney.
Well, I must say that's the first time my career has ever been called colorful. But I'm going to take that in the best sense of the word and hope that this is working. Is that something happening here? No, something just unhappened. Bear with me, folks. This is the normal story of my life. I'm a technophobe of the first order, and when it doesn't properly perform, I always assume it's my fault, but actually it's just karma. And so bear with me here, and we'll see if we can crank this puppy up. Now, I see that, and let's see if you see that. Oh. Hey! Thank you. All right, I'm going to roll through this at blistering speed because I've got 15 minutes with you, I think, and I have to fit in a short introduction for my dear friend John Bolton and all of that. So this is going to be available to you through the Centennial Institute, and if it doesn't register completely, you can see them or see me at securefreedom.org. As was mentioned by Jacob, I'm going to draw on really important work. Sadly, due to some hash-up, we don't have it available to you here. You can download it for free at shariathethreat.com. You can pay something like $2 to get it on a Kindle, or you can get it on Amazon. I encourage you to get it for reasons I'm going to go through here very quickly. It was a team effort. I was privileged to be part of it. The names are too small here to be read probably, but some of them are very familiar to you. The former Director of Central Intelligence, Jim Woolsey, a former Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency by the name of Lieutenant General Ed Soyster, a man who spoke here last year. I had the privilege of introducing him. Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, who is the number 2 man in the Pentagon's intelligence shop. Andy McCarthy, superb former federal prosecutor. People, in other words, who really know their stuff. They came together to talk about the choice that we have before us, Sharia or our Constitution. What is it? I suspect all of you now, by some measure or another, know what I'm talking about when I say Sharia. It is not about faith. To be sure, there's a patina of religiosity. There are certain rules and requirements that are religious in character, but the vast preponderance of what Sharia is a totalitarian, political, military, and legal doctrine that is supposed to be imposed by its adherents worldwide over Muslims and non-Muslims alike. It is, in short, not only characterized by these horrific attributes, and many more. It is about power. And as such, to the extent that it is completely at odds with our system of government, and I mean explicitly so, it is seditious. And we've got to recognize it as such. If indeed there's a choice to be made, it is between maintaining our form of government, our freedoms, our way of life, or going the way of Saudi Arabia, Iran, the areas the Taliban controls, Sudan, Somalia, and so on. Is that really a choice? Well, this is the shape of things to come. You may have seen this. It's now on the internet. These signs are appearing in various areas around London. And if you can read it, but it says, "You are now entering a Sharia-controlled zone." Now, this is not an official document, needless to say, but it is, as in France, where there are now 750 areas where Sharia governs. No-go zones, or zones sensibles urbaines, they call them, that the authorities dare not enforce the laws of France because Sharia is being enforced by those who effectively run the place. Will we have a choice about Sharia in America? Although I want to really spend the rest of my time to you talking about why that's not an open and shut case. A lot of this is going to depend on you. But the trouble is that adherents to Sharia are obliged to try to bring it to countries like ours. And according to Muhammad's practice and his perfect model, they're supposed to use violence if they can. And so you had that example this probably came to your attention, of that, Norwegian conservative Christian extremist who almost blew up Fort Hood again? Oh, you didn't know that he was a Christian and so on? No. Of course he wasn't. But that's not the nature of the real problem. I'm not even sure the Christian Norwegian extremist was all of those things either in Norway. But that's another subject for another day. What I'm talking about is the danger that, unbeknownst to most of us, in parallel with this kind of violent jihadism is a kind of stealth jihad. Because according to the doctrine of Sharia, where it's not practicable to use violence, you are supposed to use other techniques. Some have come to call them civilization jihad, specifically these characters. Now, just scan quickly, if you would, the creed of the Muslim Brotherhood up there. Allah is our objective. The Prophet is our leader. The Quran is our law. Jihad is our way. And then there's this kicker. Dying in the way of Allah is our highest hope. Now, it might surprise you to know that the top intelligence official of the United States government, the Director of National Intelligence, Jim Clapper, testified before the Congress in February that this was a largely secular group that had eschewed violence and was committed to charitable works. Well, I don't know about you, but he obviously hasn't read the brief. In particular, and this comes from the book Sharia, the Threat to America, the fact that exactly the same goals as Al-Qaeda pursues are being pursued by the Muslim Brotherhood. They simply are using somewhat different tactics. But they seek the triumph of Sharia worldwide and its governance under a caliphate. And these are the sorts of things that make it not nonviolent, but pre-violent. Pursuing here in America, and we happen to have this document thanks to a very serendipitous stroke of luck, when an alert Maryland Transportation Authority cop out in my part of the world happened to notice a couple driving back and forth an enormous artery called the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, and observed that a woman wearing a hijab in that car was photographing the structural supports of the bridge. He said, "That doesn't look good." Pulled them over, ran their IDs, discovered that the man, the driver, Ismail El Barassa, was wanted on a material arrest warrant out of Chicago in connection with Hamas fundraising activities. That gave rise to a search warrant for the FBI, which prompted them to go top to bottom through their home in Annandale, Virginia, about 20 minutes from Washington, D.C.'s seat of government. Lo and behold, they found in the basement a sub-basement which held the concealed archives of the Muslim Brotherhood in America. 80 banker boxes full of documents, one of which had this mission statement in its strategic plan. Describing the Muslim Brotherhood's goals and objectives and mission in America as a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within by our hands and the hands of the believers. They also found this phased plan. Again, remark upon the incompatibility of this with the Director of National Intelligence remarks. And by the way, he clarified them subsequently, but still, that he'd even say it registers badly here because, as you see, it starts with a covert building of capacity and ramps up inexorably to phases 3, where they're now using the media. Anybody seen CARE lately on Fox News or other media outlets? Phase 4, where they're engaged in open public confrontation with the government. I happen to think there's a lot of that going on at the moment. But interestingly enough, if you can read in the italicized portions, these are their self-assessment, mind you, where they say they are actively training in the use of firearms abroad and here for what? 0 hour. Phase 5, seizing power. These are not my words. This is not an intelligence assessment. These are the Brotherhood's own plans laid bare, and we ignore them at our peril. From our book, we talk about what they are doing to advance this mission through the phases that were just enumerated. And you see, it's a very comprehensive strategy through pre-violent means to penetrate or at least to try to influence virtually every element of our governing and civil society. Now, it might surprise you to know that one of the targets for that influence campaign are the people in this room and the communities we represent. Abdurrahman al-Amoudi, you may have seen, was in the news just the other day because he's currently serving what was a 23-year prison sentence on terrorism charges related to his efforts to kill the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, now King Abdullah, with $500,000 of Muammar Gaddafi's money. This guy, before he was imprisoned, got the responsibility from our government under Bill Clinton and Al Gore to place chaplains in our military and prison system. How do you like them apples? Well, he was in the news the other day because the Obama Holder Justice Department has decided to reduce his sentence. So he'll be getting out shorter. It's still, I think, 7 years or so off, but still, he'll be getting out. Now, the point is, he went to work targeting conservatives back in 1998. And the next slide might shock you, but I believe you have a need to know. This is how he did it. He established, with the help of a man known probably to all of you, Grover Norquist, an organization called the Islamic Free Market Institute in Washington. I happen to know a lot about this because I was co-located with it for 7 biblical long years, warning throughout about this problem. It's not ancient history, folks. The influence operation being run by Muslim Brotherhood operatives and agents against our movement, because, after all, we're the most likely, aren't we, to provide real resistance to the Muslim Brotherhood's efforts to insinuate Sharia by stealth in our country. But as recently as earlier this month, Grover used his somewhat famous Wednesday meeting in Washington to campaign against one of the most important initiatives now underway in this country in 23 states across our land. 3 of them have already enacted it. It's called American Laws for American Courts. Pretty straightforward proposition. It basically says this: any foreign law, it doesn't single out Sharia, but it would be covered, any foreign law that is incompatible with our freedoms, either pursuant to the Constitution or state policy, cannot be used in our courts. And Grover Norquist convened a group of people to inveigh against this, which happens to be one of the top Muslim Brotherhood operations at the moment, because they recognize that if people like you across this country learn that Sharia is in fact being insinuated into our courts. We did a study just a few weeks ago in which we found 50 cases, and this is a small microcosm of the larger judiciary, but 50 cases at state appellate levels where Sharia was being insinuated, and believe it or not, folks, in 23 states, in 27 of those cases, either the trial level court or the appellate level court upheld the use of Sharia, usually at the expense of women and children. One of the most notorious examples you probably heard about was in New Jersey, where a state judge found that a Muslim woman, could not receive a restraining order against her Muslim husband, who was systematically raping and torturing her, on the grounds that, in the judge's view, he was simply practicing Sharia. Now, that was overturned on appeal, fortunately, but the fact that it even happened is evidence of why this American Laws for American Courts is needed. This is, unfortunately, I'm afraid, a classic example of an influence operation. and again, I think you need to know this because it is fracturing conservatives on a whole host of issues. To have a person prominent as Grover is, inveighing against an anti-Sharia agenda, among other things, at least it is confusing the dickens out of people we need to have on our side, should we wish actually to become, once again, a majority party in this country. So, concluding, I think our choice is absolutely clear. Sharia is totally unacceptable as a political undertaking in this country. It must be resisted. It is antithetical to everything we hold dear. And frankly, I will tell you this. If you hear Muslims tell you otherwise, and you will, insisting that Sharia is actually compatible with our Constitution. It reminds me of that old Groucho Marx line, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? But, you know, look at Saudi Arabia. That doesn't look too much like the United States, does it? But frankly, those folks fall into one of two categories. Either they truly are ignorant of their own faith and traditions, or much more likely, especially if they are prominent figures, people we are told are leaders of the Muslim American community, all of whom are basically Muslim Brotherhood operatives. They are dissembling. They're engaging in what under Sharia is known as taqiyya. Don't fall for it. I think we need to treat the Brotherhood for what they are, the enemy. Much as communists were in the old days, engaged in seditious activities, we certainly should not be embracing them, as the Obama administration is doing at the moment. And not least, those who are helping them, I think, need to be held accountable as well. Now, that may sound hard. That may sound very troubling, especially given the prominence of the individual I've just mentioned. I leave you with this thought. What would he do? Well, actually, we know what he would do in a similar circumstance because he did it. Ronald Reagan was confronting the penetration of communists in his industry in the early days of the Cold War. Some of them were friends, many of them were colleagues. He felt he had no choice but to work to expose and counter and remove them as a threat. And the communist ideology that is no less totalitarian, no less antithetical to everything we believe than is Sharia. And I believe we must do no less now. So again, if you need any more information on any of this, see us at securefreedom.org. Thank you very much.